Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this edition of ScrumPulse. Today we're going to talk with Simon Reindl about organizational improvement and using a framework to guide your change. I'm Mark Noneman, also a professional Scrum trainer, as Simon is with Scrum.org, and let's get to it. First of all, let's talk about ScrumPulse itself. First of all, it's a free webinar sponsored by Scrum.org. It happens approximately monthly, and you can register and view previously recorded webinars at scrum.org/scrumpulse. And you can also see them on YouTube at the Scrum.org YouTube channel. Now, Scrum.org is all about improving the profession of software development and trying to increase the focus and the benefits that people receive from empiricism, the ability to use feedback loops to inspect and adapt and ultimately become more agile. And to do that, of course, we want to continuously deliver business value and build trust and respect between business and the IT organization. Now, a few guidelines here. First of all, your microphones have been muted throughout this session. We do encourage questions, though, and discussions, so you can treat your questions on Twitter at Scrum.org using the hashtag ScrumPulse. And you can also type your questions and comments into the webinar question window or chat window, whichever you have access to. As moderator, I'll relay those questions to Simon, and we'll have a bit of a discussion that way. So without further ado, let me introduce Simon. Simon's an experienced coach, trainer, speaker, and technologist. He's got over 18 years of experience helping people adopt new technology and realizing business value. He has experience in a wide range of business domains in both the public and private sector around the world. Simon's professional experience enables him to deliver the full range of professional Scrum courses, as well as coach organizations at all levels. And as an engagement manager with Scrum.org, he uses the Agility Path framework to help organizations discover how to improve their product delivery. Simon's passion is helping individuals, teams, and organizations deliver better value by writing software that delights the customer. Simon, take it away.
Thanks very much, Mark. Welcome. Thanks for making the time to hear what I'd like to share. So, just a quick introduction and putting it all in context, and then we're going to look at why. Why do organizations change? Why do they have the motivation to change? And then mechanics, the proven ideas, the hows that actually create a model of sustaining change, enduring change. So as soon as somebody moves on, the change doesn't just snap back to the way it was before. And then we'll explore Agility Path. And Agility Path is the change framework offered by Scrum.org, effectively using Scrum to be more agile. And then I'm going to explore evidence-based management, which is a tool, a mechanism that we can use to evaluate how successful your investment in change is, and use that as a steering rudder, as a steering mechanism to guide where you're going to invest your efforts in your next change step. And at the end, some time for some Q&A. So why go Agile? So Agile's no longer new. It's Agile Manifesto is signed over 20 years ago. Scrum's over 20 years old. And it's a lot of development organizations, the development teams get it. However, the next phase of Scrum is expanding it beyond the dev shop and including a greater collaboration with the business. So why would we make all this energy and effort into changing? And it's to address the key concerns we have in business, which is to maximize business value, to ensure our organizations remain competitive, to manage our risk so that we have greater visibility into what's going on, to be able to focus on building and expanding those products that our customers want, so that when we do invest in building something, there is a return on that. So trying to hit that sweet spot where we're maximizing value and return on investment. Now, Scrum.org has built a series of different levels of support to help people understand and learn their business and use frameworks to guide their decision making. The first level is the Scrum Guides, the Agility Path Guide, and the free assessments, which are easily accessible and help people to understand their understanding of the framework. You know, how well do you know it? Then there is the series of classes and qualifications around the core roles, that of being a team member with foundations, the developer, so whether you're an architect, tester, coder, UI engineer, the Professional Scrum Developer certification and course. And there is the product owner and the Scrum Master course. Recently, the Scale Professional Scrum course using the Nexus framework was launched, and that is a very effective, practical course. How do you coordinate the work beyond 2 Scrum teams? How do you make sure that multiple teams can work together in a coherent way? But the focus today is to talk about Agility Path. And Agility Path is the framework for helping your organization inspect and adapt in an empirical way. Basically using Scrum to be more agile. So why change? Why would you change? Often there is a distinct business need. A lot of organizations that I've worked with have found the need to change the way they're working because they need a radical innovation to improve their competitivity. This could be a top-down desire. There is a number of large organizations where the board have said, right, we're going to be agile. A classic model that started where a lot of the Scrum adoption started out from is teams wanted a more structured way of coping with the change, and that's where your development team will do Scrum under a banner of waterfall and use that to create some stability so that they can focus on building working product. An increasing reason is everybody else is. So in order to remain competitive, you need to become more agile because your competitors are shipping changes every month or less. Basically, it boils down to the core reason, it's not working. There's got to be a better way for every organization. So every organization has a different business domain, technical domain, cultural domain. And often trying to find a pattern, a cookie cutter template, and saying this template has worked on another organization, therefore it'll work on mine, is a misfounded assumption and can cause confusion because each organization is unique. So where do you need to start? You need to start with a clear vision and an endpoint. If you don't have a clear, common understanding of what you are trying to achieve, it will become increasingly difficult to motivate people to embrace the change. Having a clear, compelling vision that is very short will provide everybody with the goal, the endpoint. And when you're looking at change, what you need to adjust, how you are going to do it, you can use that reference point of your change vision to ensure that you're moving towards that. Once we get into organizations, it is so complex because everything, every factor, every aspect of your organization will be unique to you. One of the points of confusion that occurs when you talk to coaches and without a deep exploration of the context, when they're asked a question, the classic response is, well, it depends. And this is the factors that you need to embrace and understand what makeup your organization is. Where are your people based? Are they distributed? Are they co-located? Which countries are you in? What are the current processes? What business and technical domain are you using? How large are you? Because it is the combination of all of these factors, experiences, skills and perspectives that makes your organization so unique. And yes, while it will be easier to help an organization of 20 people to change, it is still feasible and workable to encourage your organization of 80,000 people to change, provided you have a clear vision and you have a supportive path to help people move towards that vision. Because you are unique, your organization's unique, your people are unique, your change is going to be unique. One of my favorite quotes from Robert Heinlein is that specialization is for insects. And that Ford model where people are interchangeable parts on the factory floor has become outmoded now that we're working in knowledge-based environments and we have to think to solve our problems. And just because a particular pattern, a particular program or template has worked in another organization does not guarantee that it's going to work in your organization because of the uniqueness of your specific content. The key point is that changing organizational culture is exceptionally complex. It is challenging to motivate people and then to have the change endure beyond the change initiative. And there has been a lot of work done, completed to try and understand this, and one of the most powerful model is the Kotter model. And in this, having that understanding of why you want to change and then building a team that are going to help guide the change, creating the vision, getting people engaged, and then taking away things that block the change. Having success and amplifying on that success to create enough momentum to help the change stick. The biggest resistance to change often comes from fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And this can be overcome by being clear in your vision and helping people through that change model. The book that is referenced there, Turn the Ship Around, is a very powerful model as well as a great example of how organizational culture can be changed by having that. In the book, Captain Marquette highlights that having clarity of vision, control mechanisms in place to understand, and ensuring that people are competent will help you enable a leader-leader culture where the decisions are based closer to the data. So it inverts the traditional model of all the data being pushed up to the managers who make the decision to empowering and encouraging the people closest to the data to make the right decisions for your organization. This is the essence of Agile, where you have empowered, self-organizing teams doing brilliant things. So when we are doing change, it's important to think about how we're going to approach that. And so this graph is a combination of the Kubler-Ross and Satir models of change. And every time we have a change, you will find yourself going through these phases. Initially, there will be resistance through denial, because why would I want to change? Everything's okay. And there is this burst of productivity where people will just work harder or longer in their current mode to try into anger once they realize that they are going to have to change. And then from the anger, it then goes to despair. it is often at the bottom of this pit of despair that people will reject a change and never come back. If somebody has rejected a change, it is significantly harder to get them to look at adopting or moving back in the direction that you want because they've already failed once. This is, typified when people say, oh, I can't give up smoking, I've already tried, or I've tried to change this behavior or habit, I failed once, I'm just going to fail again. So it takes even more conscious effort to provide them with the energy and the motivation to attempt again. If things go smoothly or correctly, then people will intellectually understand the motivation for the change and they'll accept it. And so that they'll cognitively get it, but it's not necessarily the case that they will implement the change internally. And that's the next phase, internalization, when it moves from the head to the heart and it becomes the way that things are done around here. And once it is embraced by the individual, it then becomes their new normal. And then you can look at getting another change. Now, if we think about the classic patterns of change, if everybody goes through this curve, then you're going to have a massive overlay of all these change curves going on. And that's why it can be challenging to ascertain exactly where you're at in your change process. Now, all of this can only work if the one question is answered. And that one question is what's in it for me. If you cannot provide people with a compelling, clear statement of what's in it for them, do not expect any change to be made. And this should be encapsulated in your change vision. That will provide the initial motivation for them to start trying to change. So once we do start working with this change, how do we understand what we have done or what the effect of our changes within our organization has been? And this is where we can apply empirical principles. Complex situations, rapidly changing situations, volatile situations are best managed with empirical solutions. So if we think about the classic problem of heating a room or a house, we use a thermostat. Because the external weather, there are so many variables that can affect the internal temperature of a room. We use a thermostat that regularly samples and then adjusts based upon that sampling. So this is where having an understanding of what you're going to measure based around your change can help guide your change. When we start looking at things we're going to measure, you will often find that there are some activities that don't provide any value to your organization. It is very quick to find some of these just by simply talking to people and say, well, what are you doing with your time that doesn't add any value? People will often tell you, and the reason that that activity has been brought in is often historical. So these are initial candidates for change, just removing that burden. So when we start investing in agility, we'll have lots of workshops, training, coaching, discussion, and regardless of which particular process we choose, whether we're going to use Nexus or large-scale Scrum or SAFe, how do you know what's going to be measured? How do you know what the impact is of that adoption? So before I explore that more deeply, I'd like to talk about the Agility Path framework, which is freely provided by Scrum.org as a framework to help guide your organizational change. So Agility Path is Scrum, but it's Scrum for changing your organization. So using Scrum to get Scrum. So building on the famous quote, you can't waterfall into Agile. This uses that concept to use Scrum to get more Agile. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concepts of Scrum. You have your 3 roles, your product owner, your Scrum Master, and your dev team. You have your 3 artifacts, your product backlog, your sprint backlog, and your increment, and you have your 5 events, your sprint, sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. So from these, we can then think about how we can grow this, and this is where Nexus comes in, which is Scrum for more than one team. And this introduces a concept of a Nexus integration team to help facilitate the resolution of the cross-team problems. And you'll see that the basic shape of it, it's still Scrum. So you have a backlog that gets broken down into a smaller backlog, and you work within a time box to create a potentially releasable increment. So what is Agility Path? Well, it's Scrum to change an organization, and there are some name changes to match this. You still have your stakeholders, and instead of calling it a product owner, we call it a change owner. And instead of a dev team, it becomes a change team, because the output will be a change increment. You will have a practices and change backlog to help break down into your sprint backlog. And we normally recommend that you use a 1-month sprint, because it does take time and energy to be able to create an enduring change within your organization. Even within a small organization, it can take that time for that change to stick. So you'll see that our names have changed. So we've got a change product owner, a change team instead of a dev team. We have a practice backlog and an evaluation backlog, which are used to combine to generate the sprint backlog by the change team and result in an increment of change. You will see that there is an extra event, which is the evaluation event, where you monitor your chosen metrics to see what the effect of that last increment of change is. Because it is Scrum, it is aiming for an iterative, incremental change to your organization where you regularly inspect and adapt and adjust your behavior accordingly. So the intent of Agility Path is to provide a framework to help guide change within your organization, hence the change in the names. The difference between the practice backlog and the evaluation backlog is the evaluation backlog is there to cater for your feedback from your observations, as opposed to the key driving change logs, which are captured in your practice backlog. The Scrum is moved to a weekly event due to the nature of the work that is going on. When you are developing product, it is expected that within a 24-hour period, there will have been substantial change to that product by completing work. So coding, testing, design, etc. When you're working on organizational change, your cadence needs to slow down because of the complexity and also the domain that you're working with. Hence, there is a need for a weekly Scrum, and because it is weekly, its time box is 30 minutes. So instead of having a daily Scrum of 15 minutes, you have a weekly Scrum of no more than 30 minutes. The evaluation is a continuous exercise throughout the sprint and should occur prior to the review. So there are some differences to the base Scrum framework However, at its heart, it is still Scrum. So the intent is to have iterative, incremental change to manage the risk of damaging your organization. In that classic agile way, you look for the smallest adjustment that will bring the most value. You will look for the things that are working and expand on them. If something causes pain, causes delay, disrupts progress, then you will stop, remove, and take that out. It is meant to be continuously and regularly reviewed whilst maintaining your business. You need to keep the lights on. It's not like anybody's going to allow you to stop your business for a month, change it completely, and then turn it back on again. That has been proven to not be an effective organizational change model. So the working collaboratively, working with your stakeholders, who is everybody within the organization who's being affected by the change, you will iterate through plan, do, check, act cycles. So you work out what you're going to change, implement the change, monitor it, feed that back in. So that is a summary of Agility Path. Are there any questions, comments, or observations?
Well, that's great, Simon. Yes, if anyone would like to ask a question, of course, you can type that into the question window or use Twitter at Scrum.org using the hashtag ScrumPulse. And we'll wait for any questions to come in, Simon. You know, with this agility path and driving the change, you got some new roles, new events. It's interesting that we're using Scrum to sort of drive the adoption of Agile and Scrum. Where should you get started? How do you get started with Agility Path?
In a very similar way to starting Scrum, it's identifying the people who are going to be in the roles, but most importantly, it's starting with clarifying your vision. So why should you change? Why are you going to invest all this hard work, time, and energy into doing something? What's the point? Mm-hmm. If you don't know or have an idea why change, I would suggest that perhaps the motivation isn't compelling enough. So start with a clear vision, identify the people who are going to help implement it, and then figure out, start creating a backlog of change. But definitely go and read the Agility Guide.
Okay, good. So identify the roles, the Agility Guide, that'll help us get started. Very good. We've got a question from someone in the UK. I'm probably going to mispronounce her name, but Lucas Krupa. And Lucas asks, are there any, for the Agility Path implementation, is this the idea of scrumming Scrum, which is mentioned in Ken Schwaber's book, Software in 30 Days?
Yeah, it's that fundamental idea of using Scrum to improve your Scrum.
Okay, very good. And finally, Jason Knight from Twitter, we have another question here. How might a Scrum Master work to lead the organization to create an agility path if you don't have the roles, the artifacts, and the events in place already? What advice do you have for kickstarting this effort besides reading the Agility Path Guide?
Okay, so as a Scrum Master, you're working to coach your organization to be more effective at using Agile. So what I would be doing as a Scrum Master is trying to find allies within the organization who could help move things. You'll probably identify them as stakeholders that are turning up at sprint reviews or interested parties. And I would find things that you can influence and do as a Scrum Master to make small changes around your team. So by helping your team be more effective, you have started to work on the organizational change. And I would certainly look beyond my team and really embrace that coaching the wider organization. So make sure that your stakeholders understand what the product owner's up to. Ensure that your product backlog refinement is effective and it's engaging people beyond your immediate team and product owner group. How is the message being communicated? Are you championing the success of your Scrum team? So make sure that the effectiveness of your team is being recognized, and see if anyone else in the organization would like some of that success.
Oh, that sounds pretty good. I think we have time for one more question before we move on. How does this agility path framework work with other frameworks besides Scrum, like SAFe or LESS, or some of those other scaling frameworks that are out there?
So it's both agility path and the next topic I'm going to talk about, evidence-based management, are complementary. So you could use agility path to implement LESS, because LESS is Scrum, and you could use it to implement SAFe as well by having a list of things that you need to do to implement that particular framework. So you could even use it to implement a Kanban approach, but then the argument would be that a Kanban board would be the approach and should evolve. The thing about agility path is it provides that regular cadence and that structured feedback loop, which I find a lot of teams and organizations appreciate, because then there is a reminder to have that discussion about how those last changes went. So it's completely complementary.
Very good. Right, so you can use agility path really to adopt any kind of agile practices and improve agility in general.
Yeah, I don't think it would be that successful in adopting a Prince 2 practice, but you know, I would be surprised if you couldn't.
Okay, good. All right, well, I think, why don't we go ahead and move on to the next topic so we don't run out of time, and then we'll take some more questions at the end. Go ahead, Simon.
Thanks, Mark. So evidence-based management, what is it? So the concept comes, and it's been used within medicine for quite a while, which is using the 3 pillars of empiricism, which are transparency, inspection, and adaptation, to guide your change. So by using clear metrics, we can then make an adjustment to our organization and then monitor the effect empirically. So we're going to invest a large amount of time, energy, and money into organizational change. How are you going to measure the effect of these change actions? And this is classically called the build, measure, learn, or measure, diagnose, improve loop. Applies a metric. And we need these metrics to be quantitative. There is some scope for qualitative metrics. How do you feel about this? Do you like that? However, being able to take it back to a defined number will provide us with some very clear evidence that can guide the change. How many defects do we have in production, for instance? If that goes down, we must be doing something right. Now, the reason that we need this is to be very rational about it. Under pressure, our minds do not work that well. The more pressure that we're under, the less rational our thought processes become, because of the whole biology being triggered, and then the human machine doesn't work that well. And under pressure, crazy ideas can seem very sound. Anybody who's been in a go, no-go decision at 3 a.m. in the morning, you know, do we back out or do we proceed, will appreciate the amount of tension that can happen at that time, and then we need to start looking at metrics. If we're thinking about organizational change, as we saw earlier, this can be a very emotional area. If you really want to trigger some emotion, just tell everybody there's going to be a desk move in your organization. I've seen very few things that generate such a strong amount of feeling. So what we're trying to do is be objective. By having clear numbers, it allows us to have visibility into what we're going to measure, and also have a clear target for discussion and testing. And by having a quantitative analysis around it, reduces the amount of emotional perspective. So this is the intent of evidence-based management. It comes from a Scrum-based approach to organizational change, so it builds on the agility path model, and it's based around having regular measurements of 3 key areas to create something called the agility index. The 3 key areas are the current value of your organization, the ability to innovate, so how quickly can you change and adapt, and your time to market. So it's all about that feedback loop. How fast can you get your changes to market to find out whether the market likes your changes? Because if we're doing the right thing, we will have more value sooner. And so from the chaos report, we found that when people are able to feed back, the value and satisfaction of our customers is significantly larger. Now, one of the key points on this is that you do need skilled teams. And this ties back also into the things that Captain Marquette mentioned in Turn the Ship Around, is you need competence. These skilled teams, as you can see, are much more likely to be successful. When you're learning a new skill on the job, it can be very challenging to try and meet a deadline when you don't understand either the business or technical domain that you're working in. So that it isn't, using agility path or EBM will not be a panacea. However, it will highlight that aspect for you. So how does it do that? So what we're looking at is these 3 core areas and then measures based around these areas to build this agility index. So revenue per employee, your product cost ratio, your employee satisfaction, and your customer satisfaction. It's been shown continuously that employees that are happy with their work are more effective. Your ability to innovate. How many versions of your product are you maintaining? How much of your product is used? Which areas of your product are used? How frequently are you adapting your product? And what is the profile of your defects or bugs? And the third leg is your time to market. How quickly are you getting out to market? How often are you getting out to market? And how long does it take to deliver your product to market? These numbers are all combined to create what we call an agility index. And from this, we can then measure the value of the organization, which can then lead us into a deeper diagnosis of your organization based upon the organizational capabilities. And that organizational capability is based on these 5 domains: process, productivity, value, quality, and your enterprise behaviors. You'll notice under process, in this particular instance, it is strongly weighted towards Scrum because it was a Scrum organization that is the focus. You will see that these 5 domains will be able to help describe the practices, capabilities, and competencies of this section of your organization. And you can either do this at a product base, a team base, or at an organizational level, depending upon how you wish to perform your analysis and your change. So digging into a domain enables you to evaluate a huge number of specific areas or segments around that domain to highlight the next steps. So once the diagnosis is complete and a report is created, we can then focus our efforts on adoption by using the diagnosis evidence to be able to create your practice backlog to structure your change. This then gives us the ability to use empiricism to optimize the value of what's going on in our organization. These metrics, because they're quantitative, can then be used to track our changes, and you can see here that sometimes they'll improve, sometimes they'll decrease, and this will generate a dashboard so that we can see the impact and the success or otherwise of our change efforts across our organization. So these practice domains are critical, and they help provide the data to guide our organizational change decision. And then it becomes the responsibility of the change product owner and the change product team to decide whether to focus on one domain in particular, broadly across all domains, and this is where the evidence will be used to help focus the change desires of the organization. So evidence-based management is an empirical framework that is based on using metrics and a detailed diagnosis to provide a backlog and a framework for change. These detailed analysis is aggregated into one number called the agility index, which is weighted and used to track the trend in the ROI. So you can complete one full snapshot and it will give you an agility index of, let's say, 21. You then complete another snapshot 3 months down the track and it says 33. So that implies an improvement of agility. And it is based on those 3 legs. Once you've got this trending information, you can evaluate what's happening from an organizational pattern level by domain, or you can pivot the data to understand what is happening perhaps by role in this instance, and so you can see what the impact of the changes you're applying using Agility Path has on your organization. Similarly, if you're using SAFe or LESS or some other framework, you can investigate the impact of that upon your agility. And so we can combine a lot of this to provide useful metrics to guide and influence our practice backlog. That way we can monitor our trend and we can really see what's going on for the money that we spend, what do we get out of it. So the focus of EBM is the value that you want to deliver to the enterprise, maximizing your ROI, reducing the risk of radical or destructive change, and enabling your organization as a whole to innovate by being agile. So many things that you can invest in will provide you with agility. Will it be tailored to your organization? Will it be a fad? Will it be just focused on one particular department, such as the IT department? How will all of that work together to improve your entire organization? So the purpose of EBM is to help the broader business understand agility and engage with it to improve the whole effect and capability of the organization to deliver value. Are there any questions or observations about evidence-based management?
Great, thank you, Simon. And just to remind everyone, we welcome your questions. You can type them directly into the question window or tweet them at Scrum.org using the hashtag ScrumPulse. And we do have a question waiting from Arun Daniel. He asks, how would you approach this for, say, a migration project? I presume this is evidence-based management and agility path together. He said, for example, moving from one email system to another that might take 3 months.
So if we're doing that for a specific product, I would focus on the metrics that we're trying to achieve. Like, why would we be moving from email system 1 to email system 2? And monitor, agree upfront what metrics we're trying to achieve, and then I would use a typical Scrum approach to structure that migration process, and then complete assessment at the end of that and see whether the new email system actually delivered the intended benefits as stated, so you could use it that way. Okay. For specific product-based work, though, I think that is more the typical domain of either Scrum or any of the other process tools, just right, to implement change, as opposed to this is a really focused on organizational change, the broader agility, as opposed to a specific product instance. Mm-hmm. It could be done.
Okay, good. So really focusing on the bigger level of change.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question, another question from Lucas Krupa, who asks, is there any data out there, blog posts or case studies that talk about the impact of using either agility path and or evidence-based management?
Recently there was a very good series of articles by Ralph Yocum about the Swiss Postal Service, and they're up on InfoQ. We'll add them to the summary around this particular point, and I do know there's a few other posts around it, but they're the two that leap to mind.
Okay, great. And then there's one more question here. How do I sell this to my managers? What's the best way to get them to engage with agility path and engagement?
So in my experience, the best way to discuss this is based around, how do you know? There's this desire for certainty that management have, and also, well, it's a desire for understanding. So they're investing a huge amount of time, money, and effort in being agile. Mm-hmm. How do they know what they're getting for mm-hmm. their spend? Also, how are they shaping or steering their agile adoption? Is it by pure instinct? So if they're looking for a mechanism to provide slightly clearer understanding, as well as a more structured analysis of it, then that's how I'd approach that question.
Okay, very good. Yeah, and I think my experience has been that management often wants to rush into metrics maybe even earlier than they should. So let's guide those metrics through evidence-based management. That's probably a better way to go than the traditional waterfall-based metrics.
Yeah, and this is my experience is if you're talking about organizational change, often the metrics are lagging, and if you rely on time, scope, cost, don't often give a true indication of the value that's returned to your organization.
Right.
And you can also find yourself in some rather interesting discussions about whether it's on the capital expenditure budget or the operational expenditure budget. Yes. And it digresses away from a focus on really improving your organizational value into an accounting discussion. So that confusion between cost and value is a very fast road to having your change hijacked.
Great. Yeah, and I like that the time to market aspect of evidence-based management forces you to think about changing the release pattern. A lot of organizations using traditional approaches might release once a year, maybe even 2 years, and to focus on how frequently you're releasing, what your cycle time is, how long you're having to work after the development team is done in order to get it out the door, helps to get the actual benefit by increasing release frequency.
Yeah, completely. And it comes back to that fundamental point that you cannot be truly agile until you focus on having competent engineering teams who can build a potentially releasable increment. And we've seen a huge growth in this. Scrum has been talking about this for a long time, but now it's been rebadged as DevOps, which is great, that everybody's recognizing that that whole ability to get your code and get your product released to your customers is so essential for that feedback and the effectiveness of your business.
Right. All right, great. Well, we don't have any more questions, Simon, so I want to really thank you for your talk today. Why don't we go to the next slide, and I can just remind people about, oh, you have some recommended sources here.
Yeah, so here's 3 things that I'd encourage you to read. The first one is Our Iceberg is Melting, which is a great parable about these emperor penguins that need to go and find a different iceberg to sit on. And it's a great parable about the Kotter model and how to approach change. The Agility Guide, of course, and Turn the Ship Around, which is fascinating. So in 1 year, Captain Marquette was able to turn the behaviors and the mindset of the ship around. This is a nuclear attack submarine in the United States Navy, from the worst performing ship in the fleet to the best performing ship in the fleet in a year. So it can be done in some very, very constrained, very rigorously controlled situations. So it's all good reading. So in summary, the 4 key takeaways that I hope I was able to amplify in this discussion is iterative incremental change has a much higher chance of enduring than big bang change. Agility path is based on Scrum. Evidence-based management provides you with some techniques to promote visibility and transparency, and the only way to ensure that your change endures is by engaging throughout the organization, not focusing on silos or individuals.
Outstanding. Thank you very much again, Simon, for talking with us today about Agility Path and evidence-based management driving change throughout the organization. I would like to remind everyone, if you could go to the next slide, that ScrumPulse is the occasional webinar from Scrum.org, approximately monthly. In fact, next month we are going to have a discussion around QA and test in an Agile organization, and how do you shift from an independent QA department to Agile testing. So again, thank you very much everyone for attending ScrumPulse and Scrum.org for sponsoring this as we focus on improving the profession of software development. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on ScrumPulse. Bye now.